What if the most powerful story ever told was built on a single mistranslated word? Not a philosophy, not an interpretation, one single word. A word that was changed quietly, deliberately, over 2,000 years ago. And that one change rewrote the entire foundation of Christianity. It created a doctrine, built cathedrals, launched crusades, shaped the lives of 2 billion people living right now. And the scholars who discovered the mistake have known about it for over a century. But nobody told you. The word is in Isaiah 7:14. You have heard this verse your entire life. A virgin shall conceive and bear a son. You were taught this was a prophecy, proof of the miraculous birth of Jesus. But here is what they never showed you. In the original Hebrew, that word does not mean virgin, not even close. And what it actually means changes absolutely everything.
The word in question is the Hebrew word Almah. In Isaiah 7:14, the original Hebrew text uses this word, Almah. And Almah has a very clear, very specific meaning in Hebrew. It means young woman. Not virgin, not someone who has never been with a man, simply a young woman of marriageable age. There is even a completely different Hebrew word for virgin. It is betulah. And Isaiah did not use it, not in this verse, not once. So why does your Bible say virgin? Because in 250 BC, Jewish scholars in Alexandria translated the Hebrew scriptures into Greek. This translation was called the Septuagint. And when they reached the word Almah, they chose the Greek word parthenos, which means virgin. One translation decision made by a committee in 250 BC, and that single choice became the foundation of the most important doctrine in all of Christianity. But here is the question nobody asks. Was it a mistake, or was it deliberate?
Before we go further, I want you to understand something important. This is not a small academic debate. This is not theologians arguing over footnotes in a dusty seminary somewhere. This changes everything. Because the entire doctrine of the virgin birth rests on one thing, Isaiah 7:14, that prophecy, that single verse, that single word. If Almah means young woman, then Isaiah was not prophesying a miraculous virgin birth. He was speaking about a young woman in his own time, in his own political context, warning the king of Judah about an immediate military threat, not predicting Jesus, not describing a miracle 700 years in the future. Just a young woman having a baby, like young women do. Now here is where it gets even deeper. Matthew knew this verse only through the Greek Septuagint translation. He never read the original Hebrew. So when Matthew wrote his gospel, he quoted the Greek version, with the word virgin already inserted. He built his entire birth narrative on a translation error he never knew existed. And 2 billion people today believe it as literal truth. Now, let us talk about Mary herself. Because if we remove the Greek mistranslation, if we go back to the original Hebrew understanding, who was Mary actually? She was a young Jewish woman living in 1st century Nazareth in Roman-occupied Palestine, in a culture where young women were betrothed early, married young, had children young. The Gospel of Luke tells us Mary was already betrothed to Joseph when the angel appeared to her. In Jewish culture of that time, betrothal was legally binding, more serious than modern engagement, less than full marriage. And here is something remarkable that nobody preaches about. In Matthew 1:25, it says Joseph knew her not until she had brought forth her firstborn son. Until. That word until implies what happened after. Joseph and Mary had a normal marriage, a physical marriage, after Jesus was born. And Mary had other children. Mark 6:3 lists them by name: James, Joseph, Judas, Simon, and sisters. The perpetual virginity of Mary was not in the original text either. That doctrine came centuries later, built on the same mistranslated foundation.
Now here is where the institutional betrayal becomes impossible to ignore, because the Church has known about this translation issue for a very long time. Jerome, the scholar who translated the Bible into Latin in 382 AD, the translation that became the official Bible of the Catholic Church for over 1,000 years, the Vulgate. Jerome knew Hebrew fluently, better than almost any Christian scholar of his time. And when he reached Isaiah 7:14, he read the original Hebrew. He saw the word Almah. He knew exactly what it meant. He translated it as virgin anyway. Not because he misunderstood, because the doctrine was already established, already institutionalized, already too important to correct. To change that one word would unravel everything. The virgin birth, the immaculate conception, the perpetual virginity of Mary, the entire theological architecture built on that Greek mistranslation. So Jerome chose the institution over the truth, and every Bible translated from his Latin Vulgate carried that choice forward, into your hands, into your church, into your faith. One scholar, one decision, one word, and the truth stayed buried for 17 more centuries.
So now you understand the mechanics of how it happened. A Hebrew word mistranslated into Greek, a Greek text Matthew quoted without knowing, a Latin scholar who knew the truth and buried it anyway. But here is the question that should be keeping you awake at night. Why was the virgin birth so important that Jerome chose institutional doctrine over documented truth, that councils defended it with such ferocity, that questioning it was declared heresy, punishable by death? Because the virgin birth was never just a biological claim, it was a power claim. In the Roman world, divine figures were born of miraculous conceptions. Julius Caesar, Augustus, Alexander the Great, gods and emperors entering humanity through supernatural births. When early church fathers constructed the theology of Jesus, they needed him to fit that template, to compete with Roman divinity, to outrank Caesar. A young woman having a baby was not enough. They needed a virgin, touched by God alone, producing a son with no human father. Because without that, Jesus was just a man, and a man could not justify an empire built in his name. So they took one mistranslated word and built a throne on top of it.
Now, here is what makes this even more extraordinary. Jesus himself never once claimed to be born of a virgin. Not once. In all of his teachings, all of his sermons, all of his recorded words, Jesus never referenced his own miraculous birth, never used it as proof of his divinity, never said, "Believe me because of how I entered this world." In fact, the two earliest Gospels written, Mark and John, contain absolutely no birth narrative whatsoever. Mark, considered by scholars to be the oldest gospel, begins with Jesus as a fully grown adult, walking toward John the Baptist. No manger, no angels, no virgin, just a man, appearing, beginning his work. John, the most mystical gospel, opens with cosmic poetry about the Word becoming flesh, but no virgin birth, no miraculous conception, no biological miracle at all. Only Matthew and Luke include birth narratives, written decades after Mark, both drawing from different sources, both containing details that directly contradict each other, which raises an uncomfortable question. If the virgin birth was the most miraculous event in human history, why did the earliest gospel writers not mention it? Why did Jesus himself never speak of it? And why did it only appear decades later in gospels written by men who were not there? Now I want to take you somewhere unexpected, because this is the moment where everything stops being about history and starts being about you. You were taught the virgin birth as a non-negotiable, a fundamental, a litmus test of true Christian faith. Doubt it, and you doubt everything. Question it, and you are outside the faith entirely. And that fear, that specific fear of questioning, was not accidental. It was engineered. Because here is what happens the moment you are allowed to question one thing. You start questioning everything. And a person who questions everything cannot be controlled. So the institution built walls around the most vulnerable doctrines, surrounded them with fear, with shame, with the threat of spiritual exile. You did not avoid questioning the virgin birth because the evidence was overwhelming. You avoided it because you were afraid of what questioning would make you. A heretic, an unbeliever, someone who had fallen away. But what if questioning is not the opposite of faith? What if questioning is the highest form of it? What if the Jesus who turned over tables in the temple, who challenged every religious authority of his time, who called the Pharisees blind guides and whitewashed tombs, was himself the greatest questioner who ever lived? And what if he was inviting you to do exactly the same?
So let us ask the question they never wanted you to ask. If the virgin birth was not the point, what was? Because Jesus did not come announcing his own miraculous conception. He did not build his ministry on the circumstances of his birth. He never once said, "Follow me because of how I arrived." He said, "Follow me because of where I am going." And where was he going? Straight into the heart of every broken person he encountered, straight toward the leper nobody would touch, straight toward the tax collector everybody despised, straight toward the woman caught in adultery while the crowd held stones. He went toward what everyone else ran from. And here is what is extraordinary. Every single person Jesus healed, every single person he restored, every single person he called worthy, was ordinary, not miraculously conceived, not supernaturally born, not divinely protected from the mess of human existence, just people, broken, confused, searching, exactly like you. And he looked at every single one of them and said, "You are enough, right now, exactly as you are. Not when you are pure enough, not when you are certain enough, not when your theology is correct enough. Now." Which means the miracle was never about how Jesus entered the world. The miracle was what he saw when he looked at you. Now here is where everything becomes deeply personal. Because I want you to sit with something for just a moment. Your entire spiritual life may have been built around a version of Jesus that was constructed to serve an empire. A Jesus who arrived through supernatural biology, who was fundamentally different from you, fundamentally unreachable, fundamentally other. And as long as Jesus remains other, you remain beneath him. As long as his entry into the world was miraculous, and yours was not, there is an unbridgeable gap between what he was and what you are. And that gap is where institutions live. That gap is where priests position themselves, where doctrines establish their authority, where the system inserts itself between you and the divine and says, "You cannot get there without us." But what if that gap was never real? What if Jesus was born exactly as you were born, entered this world exactly as you did, cried the first cry, drew the first breath, felt the same cold shock of arriving in a world that was not yet familiar? What if his humanity was not a costume he wore over his divinity, but the actual point? What if God chose ordinary flesh, ordinary birth, ordinary humanness, because that is exactly where the sacred has always lived? Not above ordinary, not despite ordinary, inside it.
So here is what this single mistranslated word actually stole from you. Not just a theological detail, not just an academic footnote. It stole your proximity to Jesus. Because a Jesus born of miraculous supernatural biology is inspiring to worship, beautiful to admire, impossible to follow. But a Jesus born of a young Jewish woman in a cold stone stable, into poverty, into an occupied country, into a family that questioned his sanity, into a world that ultimately killed him, that Jesus you can follow. Because that Jesus knows exactly what your life feels like. He knows what it feels like to be doubted by the people closest to you. Mark 3:21 tells us his own family thought he had lost his mind. He knows what it feels like to be betrayed, to be abandoned, to pray in a garden so desperately that the gospel writer says his sweat fell like drops of blood. He knows what it feels like to cry. John 11:35, the shortest verse in the Bible. 2 words. Jesus wept. Not Jesus performed, not Jesus demonstrated divine composure. Jesus wept because he was human, fully, completely, without asterisk. And that humanity, that complete unprotected humanness, was not the limitation of his divinity, it was the fullest expression of it. The mistranslated word did not elevate Jesus, it isolated him. And in isolating him, it isolated you from the one person who understood you completely. So, let us bring everything home. One word. Just one word. Almah. A young woman living in ancient Judea, breathing the same dusty air, walking the same stone roads, feeling the same fear of an uncertain future that you have felt. And from that ordinary young woman came something that split human history in two. Not because of her biology, not because of the mechanics of how her son arrived, but because of what that son chose to do with the ordinary human life he was given. He chose the leper when everyone else chose distance. He chose the outcast when everyone else chose comfort. He chose the cross when he could have chosen silence. And he did all of it not from some elevated supernatural position safely above human suffering, but from inside it, completely, fully, without protection. The mistranslated word did not make Jesus more divine, it made him less human. And in making him less human, it made him less yours. So here is what I want to leave with you tonight. Your faith does not depend on a translation decision made by a committee in 250 BC. Your connection to Jesus does not live in a Greek word chosen by scholars who never met him. It lives in every moment you choose love when fear would be easier. Every moment you choose presence when distance would be safer. Every moment you choose to stay when everything in you wants to run. That is where Jesus actually is. Not above your ordinary life, inside it. Waiting to be found, not in the miracle of his arrival, but in the miracle of what arrives in you when you finally stop looking up and start looking within. That was always the teaching. That was always the truth. And now it is yours.